Yeah.
Okay, so let's just jump right into it. A very good evening, all of kindly mute, kindly mute. Today we'll be having three panelists on the floor to talk. It will just be Kofi, Mr. Joshua Edu, and Vicentia. So if you are not part, kindly mute for now. So let's begin. Okay, a very good evening to all of you. Welcome to the Young Investors Digest, your weekly program where we dissect issues with stakeholders and experts so that they'll become digestible to the youth, basically. My name is Maxwell, and I'm your usual suspect for host for this edition of the program and for the subsequent ones. And I do it alongside Vanessa Oparibia Akufu, who hopefully will be joining us shortly. So for today, right, today we'll be talking about a very controversial topic for people in my age bracket. That's gambling versus investing. And this is an issue that is sort of dear to most people, especially the so-called investors. I put it in air quotes, the boys who sort of bet big on the league and whatnot and all sports events and as against traditional investing. So this is a very key issue, and we'll be discussing it with some industry experts and people in the investing and advocacy space, and we'll see what their take is. So let me just start out and give a little background. Generally, in Ghana and in fact the whole continent, there's been a wave of sports betting or arbitrage betting happening on a continent. And of course, this has been as a result of most international betting companies coming into the market, and they've come in their numbers. So now you are not short on options when it comes to betting houses or betting websites. So what they do is that they offer or they promise heaven with just a little token. They promise incredible odds, and you can bet on a sport. And as we know, this is a footballing continent. So when it comes to most of the patronage, they usually go towards the sport of football, and they promise like crazy returns with just a little token. You understand? And honestly, it's a very, very appetizing offer. So you have most people jumping on board and becoming addicts to an extent. And we seem not to address the problem or have the conversation around how this is eroding at the very livelihoods of our youth or is distracting them from the issues which are pertinent. You understand? When you are up and coming, it is important that you place emphasis on stabilizing your finances, understanding the nuts and bolts of finances and whatnot. You understand? And honestly, gambling is a very deadly distraction, and it's happening on a scale unimaginable. And regulation is also turning a blind eye to it. So today we are going to cut our teeth on these issues with experts and advocates, and we'll basically see how best we can turn this tide around. So yeah, first on the floor, we'll talk to Joshua Edu, who is a convener for the Gambling Addiction Awareness Program. He is obviously doing a lot in that space to bring attention to something which is seldom spoken about. And he basically will tell us what he's done so far, what strides have been made, and what the whole scene looks like. Mr. Joshua.
Yes.
Yeah, so gambling is, since you are more of a convener or an advocate for gambling addiction awareness, I'd like you to speak to something more in your alley, right? So gambling is a problem. How big a problem is it, and how come people aren't talking about it as much?
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. And so, to start with, we sort of began with some data collections, and so we did that with 250 people across 5 different betting companies. And so what we did was to have some parameters and then just ask some few questions so we can be conclusive with the data and then know which direction to go. And so first of all, gambling for most people starts as fun and then like a harmless diversion, and before you realize it becomes an unhealthy obsession with serious consequences. But these youth don't recognize that. And so then the data that we got kind of informed us of what is really happening on the ground. And so out of the 250 people, the youth that were able to interview, the 230 of them confessed that they initially saw the betting as like an investment. And so, for instance, they go in there with the motive of sort of like doubling their cash, and that is what most people would want to do. And then because some of these betting companies promise like high odds on some of the games, then the notion is that if I have like 20 cities and then I bet I can get like 40 cities, accumulate that on several odds, and then probably at the end of 2 months, I will be able to have more. But that is not the case, and they are being deceived, which most of them don't realize. Another thing we also realized was that out of the 250, 240 of them have lost more than they have won. And so initially they win, and then they think it's like a continuous thing. They can be winning every day, which also is not the case. And so they win, lose, and in gambling, there's this thing they call chasing losses. And so the thing is that, okay, I have lost 20. Why don't I invest 50 to recoup the 20 that I have lost? And before you realize, they go in again with the 50 and lose the 52. And so that the plan now is that, why don't I go in with a huge sum to recoup the 70 that I've lost? And before they realize, they have spent more. Yeah. Hello?
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, sure. And out of the 252, 250 also confirmed or confessed that they have actually borrowed to gamble. And when you have all these parameters, then it's definitely heading towards the gambling addiction. And so then it means for the 250 that we were able to interview, we concluded that 240 of them, depending on the responses that they gave us, means they are now gambling addicts, but they don't know, because on most of the betting platforms, there is no support or whatever. Like, there are no links to say, in case, I'm like betting more than usual, this is the number to call for help. And then, okay, so that is it with the data. So, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Health, it's actually a body, an organization that usually comes up with mental disorders. And now they have classified gambling addiction as a disorder. And so then it means for gambling addicts, they have traits of drug addicts and like alcoholics. And so what we are planning now on doing is to, but it's not conclusive yet, is to now have like a soft skills trainings for these people, and then run trainings for them to see how we can be able to create awareness on some of these things. They have admitted that they need help, but then where to go is the problem. And so that is where we come in. And so for these 250, those will be like the youth that would want to start with, and then run the trainings for them and see how it will be helpful on their path to move away from the gambling. And we know this is like a process. They won't just stop gambling at a go, but with time, then they will just reduce the number of times that they gamble. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's very true. Very, very key. Pointed out. There's this saying they have for casinos in Vegas that the house always wins, such that in as much as you think you've made a profit on a net gain level, the house has obviously made more from you. And this is more prevalent when people try to revenge bet when they are losing. So they start chasing shadows, they chase wins and whatnot. And this even forms or goes into the spiral of addiction, where they feel that they could make back what they lost on the next bet, or the bet after that, or the bet after that. So this doesn't really deviate from the normal symptoms of addiction, with withdrawal symptoms and whatnot. So I feel what you're saying is spot on with that. On the broader issue of alternatives, when it comes to betting and finance and all that mishmash of a topic together, you'd find that, you see, when you speak to the youth, education isn't just point blank pursuit of, let's say, profit. They are looking for an out. They are looking for a way to turn their fortunes around. There's a lack of financial literacy education, but also there's a lack of genuine alternatives, one can argue, or perhaps there is a lack of priority in emphasizing those alternatives. So you'll find that people are into gambling because they hope that perhaps they can flip a certain amount of money and that could perhaps change their fortunes or lead them to invest in a more stable enterprise. All these things, that kind of energy, that kind of vision makes perfect sense if it was into a traditional investment vehicle. Gambling doesn't offer any security in that manner, but people still see it that way because the highlights, the efforts that are put into sort of advertising gambling is more rigorous, it's more aggressive than traditional finance, especially youth-focused finance. And this probably is a nice segue into the topic of youth banking or youth investment, which a lot of traditional or mainstream banks have shied away from. We're only seeing inroads being made by certain banks up to date. So yeah, that's spot on. Thank you very much, Mr. Joshua. So now I'll turn my attention to Vicentia. So Vicentia, you're a financial advisor with UMB Holdings Limited. You've done finance for a while. You understand equities. You know what investment vehicles might be ideal for the youth and whatnot. But we've not seen a lot, we've not seen a lot of advocacy up until what, let's say, this group, Young Investors Network, is doing. We've not seen a lot of far-reaching advocacy, like the way betting companies do activations on campus, where they offer, let's say, sort of sign-on bonuses or whatever. You see, they're trying to get you to get in. It's an immersive program. They're going all out. Finance houses or traditional financial institutions or investment institutions aren't going that extra mile. Why?
Thank you. I unfortunately, why some of it has to do with regulation. So every decision, every kind of advertisement you do as an investment house has to be approved by the regulator. Everything has to go through, all the due processes and all of that. That's one. It's sometimes I think financial houses, there's the time, there's the money aspect of it all. And so people kind of drag their feet when it comes to that one as well. You see, the unfortunate part is looking at it from, let's say, the way the betting institutions or the betting sites are looking at it. They're looking at, okay, if I do a lot of publicity, I get more people to sign on, which means more money for us. Investment, on the other hand, is unfortunately not the same. You could do a lot of drives. So you could go out there to campuses, to all of those things. You spend a lot of money, but then it has to be a long-term project you are looking at. If you're looking at the quick, the quick turnaround, it's not the same as let's say the betting thing would do. And so sometimes I think that's what kind of holds those institutions back when it comes to that. But the joy of it is having young investors around, putting all the effort to make the most noise about investment, so that people would also know what it is about. We are gathered here this evening. Everybody here gets to hear more about something probably they thought they knew, but then they get to hear or they get to have more information, and it's because of what Young Investor is doing. And so I think it's a process. I remember talking to somebody, a colleague of mine, just last week, and I was telling the person that I used to work in a different institution, and I remember we used to practically beg them to do publicity. Let's do radio adverts, let's do billboards, something. Just put a signpost, even if it is just putting a signpost here. And at the time, they believed in word of mouth. Okay, that's how the company has thrived all these years. It's because of the performance of the fans, and then people just tell one person to the other. But what we also forget is that the world is changing. And so once the world is changing, social media is the way to go. moving out there for people to see you and for people to hear you is the way to go. But I believe we are in the right path. Young Investor is helping us do a great job, and so I think we'll give it up to Young Investor for young investors for that great work as well.
Yes, thank you very much. So you highlighted two areas, I believe. You said regulatory hurdles, or how much of a system is, as versus how betting companies, obviously they are regulated by the Gaming Commission, but they have much more of a free hand to do what they want versus a bank, which perhaps doesn't. In fact, it's not perhaps doesn't. But then again, you could always make a fair about how betting companies have come onto the market and they are using a lot of lobbyist pressure to get their way. It has never been an easy terrain to navigate for anybody, but they found a way around it. Similarly, shouldn't finance houses put more effort in lobbying, let's say pushing lawmakers to sort of like this advocacy for a recent conversation has come up, like reducing the savings age. That way, let's say young people could be more in charge of their financial decisions at an earlier age versus another age. Although we have in-trust accounts that can be held in trust by their parents and whatnot, but it's not the same as you handing the mandate to the individual at, let's say, age 15 or 14, that they should make investment decisions and whatnot. Because typically, I feel that has had an effect somewhat in terms of how the finance houses view the youth as a marketable catchment area. Because if in the end, I'm going to talk to a child and the decision-making falls to a parent, why do I put efforts in what? Sensitizing the child. I'm much rather go to the source, you understand? So it doesn't make sense. It doesn't appeal to their bottom line. I'd much rather put it. If they spend a lot or they do a lot of sensitization drives on campuses and whatnot, even at the expense of their bottom line, because they feel that they won't realize the soonest return from there. So there not be a lot more lobbyist pressure in that space. Should banks, who I know are the cornerstones of the economy, or to an extent, should they not assign priority to these areas? Should they not?
Well, I agree to an extent. You see, one thing is some of these laws, although they may be a bit rigid to an extent, has a way of protecting the investor as well. So a typical example is you go out there, let's say the age is reduced to about 15 years. That's fine. You and I may not have any ulterior motive when we are talking to the people. You are getting them the best, you are giving them the best advice to sign on to the best thing that would work for them. But mind you, not everyone has their interest at heart. And so, although it may be good for quote and unquote business, it will be good for business. It may be good for the individual to say, okay, we've spoken to them. They need to make their own decision. They could also be exploited. That is one. And I don't think that anybody would want to hear that a 15-year-old has been exploited or has, been asked to put their money somewhere. Tomorrow, the money is nowhere to be found. The institution is nowhere to be found. Even what they promised every time they say T&Cs apply, probably they never even read that T&C. They don't even know what it's all about, and then they sign up. That is where there might be a bit of a problem. But I think that in the interest of the same public, some regulations may have to be a bit relaxed. It's the time, it may have to be relaxed. Who does it? This one, I know SEC and GSC and all of that are heavily backing Young Investors Network. So it looks like as for the lobbying, we would have to also be moving the lobbying from all angles at some point. It would be good. It would be good to have some of these things a bit relaxed, because you take a document out there and it may take days, it may take weeks, it may take months. And mind you, it is also money that is going in there. And so if I put in all the money, sometimes one of the things that would deter the institution is I put in all these huge amounts of money going out there to do radio adverts, TV adverts, and all of those things, and all of that, spend money on social media marketing and all of those things. The return is not the same. I think we have a long way to go. We've done some, but we have a long way to go in terms of creating awareness about what investment is. I think creating the awareness more is one of those things we can also do whilst we wait for the publicity and all of those things. I think screaming out what investment is all about, and getting people to demystify certain myths about investments. People have very interesting perception about what investment is and all of that. So I think if we're able to do all of those things, it will help us. But every institution, all of us together, I think we can do something. And we are doing it. Just that it's not enough. We are doing some, but it's not enough. And there's more room to go. That is why I'll come back and still say that Young Investors is also doing a great job again at all of that as well.
Great. Thank you, Tensia. I'll come back to you again. So yeah, Young Investors obviously making some strides in that area, and we can only get better from this point. So on the issue of how rigid traditional finance is versus gambling, how we understand risk-adjusted performance and whatnot. Typically, the user experience when you're signing up to gambling is as easy as the word. A toddler can create an account in minutes and get a sign-up bonus and start gambling. And I think that effort is obviously deliberate. They're trying to basically rope you in, make sure that you understand that this is a very, very friendly, user-friendly experience at any time. Of course, that is a distraction from the issue that gambling in itself is a loss-making venture. Now, let's talk about how gambling is eroding at the savings, robbing the country of the possibility of massing up capital for development. And I'll turn my direction to Kofi Chebuzia, who is the Executive Director for Young Investors Network. He also is knowledgeable in the space of investment, and he can speak to the issue very well. So people are gambling, losing money. International corporations have entered the market. One way or the other, they will repatriate their earnings outside the country. That would then have repercussions on the economy because that money could have perhaps been sunk into other ventures and then be one way or the other lead to development. What is the way forward, Kofi? How can we mitigate this problem of, should I say, widespread gambling? Because it's getting worse. We see them, and what even breaks my heart is the level of endorsement from key stakeholders who could have channeled the energy into other profitable ventures. We are getting endorsements from opinion leaders. We're getting endorsement from celebrities and whatnot. They could be doing something else, but then they are going there because that's where the money is. How do we solve this problem?
Well, thank you. Well, I don't see it as a problem. The way I see betting, it's a process of investing money as well. If you understand me, because once you put in money in expectation of a return, that's an investment. However, what we can do as a country is to ensure that we have a thorough discussion about this topic so that we find ways of benefiting from it. I'm saying this because, just as you mentioned, we are losing a lot of capital from this country. All these companies are not properly taxed. So most of their profits are shipped out of the country, which has adverse effects on our local currency. And Young Investors Network is on record as stating that it is part of the reason why our cedi is rapidly depreciating. It's part of the reason why we can never have a stable currency. So what I'm expecting from our financial managers, economic managers, is that they should turn their attention there and ensure that the proper taxation percentages are applied so that we won't have so much money going out. All right, so on the other side, we can say that a lot of youth are turning their attention to to betting. As you rightly said, it's quite easy to open an account. And maybe our regulators within the investment space, they can also have a discussion to see how they can make account opening a bit easy to ensure that the youth or the young people are not mostly attracted to the betting industry. So once the account opening process is made easier, then we can look at enriching our investment space as well. Because as it stands now, there are limited avenues. There are limited avenues for investing, and it's not difficult to say that maybe you're buying treasury bill or shares, you're buying some mutual funds, and if you look through the market, most of their returns are quite similar and all that. So attention should be put on the stock market. We should get many more companies listed. We should have the multinationals, as they keep operating in this country without listing. That's a problem. We should get them listed. We should have regulations to ensure that once you get your company registered in this country as a multinational, you are making such and such amount of profits, we should put you on the market. We should get you listed. Capital market is the way to go for the future. So basically, that's what I think. That's what I think is a solution. We should get our house in order by making sure that the capital market is fully functional. And I think by so doing, the youth can turn their attention onto the market.
Yeah, thank you. You are even speaking to something I highlighted earlier, which is a provision of genuine alternatives to what is distracting the youth. A diverse and sophisticated capital market, which offers varying opportunities to create wealth. Okay, awesome take. So just so we round up, I'll take a final take from Joshua Edu. So Joshua, what are the methods? What are the tactics you are seeing yourself employ? Typically for addiction programs, there are interventionist schemes, or let's say support groups, or then again, legislative programs, which would mandate people who provide services that make people addicted to issue disclaimers or partake themselves in educating people about the dangers. Case in point, we heard about the tobacco industry where advocates pushed for them to write disclaimers that smoking is a problem on the packets of their smokes. And that has been an issue, that has been a win for the advocacy community till date. You see, whenever you buy a pack of cigarettes, there's a warning that is bad for your health. And similarly, we have drug companies who have been forced to have full disclosure policies about the dangers of perhaps overdosing or misusing certain items. What is the tangent of your advocacy? What's the direction? Are you looking to force these betting houses to partake in the solution? Are you looking to sort of tailor the conversation, or perhaps make them more responsible for what they are doing? Because the fallout from betting is that, yes, it is robbing people of their wealth. At the same time, it's making them a menace to society. They become addicts and they can't play key roles in the economy. What is your roadmap?
Okay, all right. So thank you for the question. So since in Ghana, there is no organization, say like a development organization, like an NGO doing something like this, then it was difficult to kind of get like a model that is already working here in Ghana that we can also use. And so there is this company, an NGO in the UK called Gambling Awareness. They have a model which they use, but their focus is on the individuals, because from most of their reports, it's as if most of these betting companies don't want to be responsible, even though on their sites they have written that they can be contacted for any support. But then all they care about is their money. And so for us, the focus is now on the individual. And so we have developed like a curriculum that I mentioned earlier. It's more of a soft skills training sort of thing, which with emphasis on the financial literacy. And gambling awareness, that is the name of the organization in the UK. They have something similar. And so we want to let them come in and support us. We just then will test the model on the 250 youth that we were able to get to volunteer. And then whatever the outcome will be, that is where we can extend it to the larger community.
Great. I know for sure that you can always rely on Young Investors Network to be a helping hand in this endeavor. And I feel it's also admirable that you are speaking with numbers and the data, because numbers never lie. And it's important to have a full grasp of how precarious the situation is with gambling. Thank you so much. Yeah, so Vicentia, final take. You mentioned a lot about how regulation in and of itself is the hurdle or it's the obstacle. But then again, it's because of how rigid regulation has been, there is no incentive by finance houses to partake themselves in mobilizing the youth or seeing the youth as a marketable catchment area, because then you realize that they can't justify the cost involved. Assuming regulation or regulatory bodies partook in the process and they did some of the heavy lifting for them, perhaps the conversation would be different. How do we engage regulation? How do we change the conversation or the narrative around it? That way, it is worth having the conversation in the first place. Because most people feel that, yes, financial regulation is there to protect the investor. But I feel that if we begin a conversation around how to make or tailor youth solutions or youth legislation, that way investment can become appealing, then maybe we could always, once the conversation begins, I think we can explore ways to monetize avenues that will be birthed from that process. How do we go about engaging stakeholders and regulators? How do we go about it?
I believe it starts right from, it starts with the fund managers. So let's say fund manager A, fund manager B, fund manager C. It starts with conversation. So just like what you rightly said, if we start looking at the whole narrative differently, we keep saying we are not in normal times and things are changing. So the question is, what are we doing about it as an industry? I believe it's a conversation that needs to be had right from the fund managers level, where we all come together and we are looking at, okay, things have changed. The youth of today are not the same as in our mother's time or in the 90s and all of that. They are not the same. This is what is happening. And so how do we also dig in? How do we make sure that we are giving the right advice, we are giving the right direction, and we are giving people the avenue to put their money to good use? I believe that once the conversation is had at that level, then we move it to the regulators table. I believe it would be easier or be better than just one institution or two institutions saying, okay, we think that it would help, us to do this. I think it's a bit difficult when it's just one or two people doing that. But if we come together as an industry where fund managers are concerned, we are having a table and we are having a discussion, just like what we are doing here today. If fund managers are, okay, the times have changed, everybody knows that. But what are we doing about it? How can we get the regulator to also help us or support us in terms of, not giving us too much restrictions when it comes to putting the information out there? How do we fast track those things? How do we get the right things? How do we get them on our side to make it easy and simple? I believe that starting from there would help us. For me, I think once we are able to have the conversation from that level and we move it up to the regulators table, it makes it easier, makes it simple. It's possible. There's nothing that's impossible. It's possible. And so that's what I think would help us as an industry and as a nation. It will help us to you know, to build a youth friendly or a youth friendly investment society. It would help us. It will help us very well. And so that's where what I would say.
Awesome. Thank you, Essentia.
You're
Uh,
welcome.
we've heard from key people today about a topic which I believe is long overdue when it comes to being highlighted. We realize how much of a menace gambling is, gambling which is left unchecked is, because there's responsible gambling. Gambling in itself is an economy, and I wouldn't want to bash it all out. I feel it plays its role in capital circulation one way or the other. But if there's an imbalance where it preys on vulnerable or unsuspecting people in the manner it does, where there is no consciousness around the decisions that are taken, and you can always argue that, and you can make a case of exploitation out of it, then I feel it's high time we shone the light on it and had the proper conversation around it. So yes, that basically wraps up today's conversation. Thank you so much to Vicentia Na Sam, who's a financial advisor with UMB Holdings Limited, Kofi Che Bozia, who's executive director, also with UMB, and executive director of Young Investors Network, and also with UMB, and Joshua Edu, who's a convener for Gambling Addiction Awareness Program. They have said very, very profound statements on today's edition of Young Investors Digest, and we certainly hope that the conversation does not end here. So we'll come your way next week again with an equally exciting episode talking about very important issues for youth and in the topic of investment. So we hope that you join us then. So until next week, thank you very much. My name is Maxwell. I'm the host, and I'm co-host. My co-host is Vanessa Paribia. She couldn't join us today, but she would next week for sure. And I'm looking forward to having her on the show.
Hi, Maxwell. Hi, Maxwell.
Yeah, I realize